Welcome everyone. I'm Danielle O'Steen. I'm curator at the Kreeger Museum, and thank you for joining us in this virtual space. I was looking back at artist talks we were doing last summer, and we were such newbies at this, and now we all live in this Zoom world. We're starting to return more and more to in-person events. Hopefully keep posted for some upcoming events, hopefully this summer and fall. But in the meantime, I'm so glad that that Imogen-Blue can join us today in this virtual space. And wherever we're finding you, I hope you are well and safe. It's a beautiful day here, and we have the hum of the cicadas in DC. So before I get started, I'm delighted to have with us Imogen-Blue Hinojosa, who I've been working with on this project since I was looking back Imogen-Blue at my emails. It was in November that we first started talking. So before I get into, which is crazy, so before I get into the details of this project and how it relates to Imogen-Blue's work, I want to give a bit of bio, a bit of her background. So Imogen-Blue was born in Corpus Christi, Texas, but we're lucky to have her now in DC. She has her BFA in photography from MICA and her MFA from Goldsmiths in London. She's had solo exhibitions in London, Dublin, Baltimore, and was a 2020 Halcyon Arts Lab Fellow. That's a very short version of a longer CV, but Imogen-Blue, I know you also wanted to share something exciting that's upcoming for you.
Yeah, I have a performance coming up in June in person with a few other fabulous artists at Transformer, which was curated by Josie Corona and is part of Transformer's performance workshop that they run. So that'll be coming in June. So look forward to that. I also just wanted to take the time to thank you, Danielle, for having me in the Kreeger. Of course, Nicole Dowd, who put us in contact, and as well as Luke, who I worked with, who runs a company called Gate Chains, who lent me some of the materials for my costuming, which was fabulous. And of course, DJ Capricorn from Cork in Ireland, sorry, who mixed the track for the video. Amazing work.
And you're reminding me that I didn't do my due diligence of my housekeeping. I forgot to say that we are recording this. This will go on our YouTube channel for folks that have not been able to join us today. And we will be taking questions at the end using the Q&A function, which I feel like now everyone, I don't have to explain these things anymore, but please feel free to drop questions at any point and we will find them at the end. Okay, so yes, getting back to when we first started talking in November. So Nicole Dowd, formerly at Halcyon, put us in contact because we started working on this idea of bringing artists into the Kreeger Museum space to engage with the museum in different ways. This was around the time that we were closing again because of the pandemic, and we were really thinking about how we can think of our space differently, how we can imagine that we are not just our fine arts hanging on the wall collection, but that the building itself can be a kind of a living, breathing space that artists can engage with, that we can think differently about. And so I was really excited sitting in on the introductions for the Halcyon Fellows to learn more about your work, Imogen-Blue. And so Nicole Dowd put us in touch. I'm grateful to her for that. And it was through quarantines and illness. We kept getting delayed, but this is the reality of between November to now, that we kept pushing forward. I think we were both very excited about this happening. We wanted to open our doors to kind of let you really create something that would support your work and that would allow you to think a little bit differently about using a space like ours. So I'll let you talk about kind of the nuts and bolts of how this happened. But I just wanted to give some context into the kind of labor of love that this has felt like over the course of many months. So we finally were able to bring you in. So it was March, I haven't noted, March 18th. And it was a really unique experience for us as staff because we wanted to create a safe space for you to perform, safe for you, for us. The museum was close to the public. And so we arranged a very skeletal crew. It was really just me and another staff member, and then your videographer, who were basically, I think, more than 20 feet away from where you were performing. And so to kind of give you this stage that was safe, but you know, was also very open. So I feel very, I felt very grateful that I was able to be part of that experience, but then also really understanding how much went into this performance, how this was such an incredible physical exertion in addition to being artistic expression. So we are not going to be able to show the video today because I don't trust Zoom to really do it justice, but we will put the link to the video in the chat. If you haven't seen it already, please find it after the talk, but we'll show you stills throughout so that you get a sense at least of what was happening. So do you want to walk us through kind of where this piece came from and how it happened?
Sure. So once upon a time, years ago now, it seems, I had a residency in Ireland as part of A4 Sounds' We Only Want the Earth residency program. And during that program, I had spent about 3 months putting together this performance piece that required 7 performers, was all centered and based around the rising death toll of trans women globally, and trying to address this pandemic of femicide that was plaguing the world, is still continuing to plague the world. And so wanting to sort of create a space for these women who were, martyred via social media one week and forgotten the next, and trying to elongate and engage people with that conversation more, I guess with more focus and more desire for something to be done. And so initially when I created that performance, I was thinking a lot about rave culture and trans visibility, and sort of where trans women exist, and where I've found trans community. Particularly, I used to work at a kink club that was basically run by trans women. It was a space for us to be seen, and it was really like it was almost this like a pageant for us to just show up and turn looks and see each other and be seen and know that the community existed. And so unfortunately, because of COVID, that performance initially changed and shapeshift quite a bit, and it evolved into a film, which I think actually was just as potent. And I was really pleased with the work that we did after everything had been said and done. And so now, given this opportunity at the Kreeger Museum, and thinking about, being stuck indoors for so long and not being able to access those communities, being estranged from my community in London, and the trans women that I know, and the queer people that I hold community with, and it being really difficult to be freshly back to the US during a presidential election as a trans woman of color, knowing nobody, trying to carve out a space for myself and build a community, which hasn't really totally happened here, unfortunately, but trying to find a place to carve out that space and to I guess summon it back up. And so when you came to me with this proposition for the Kreeger Museum, I began to think, the thing that I miss most is being in the space of being able to dance and to experience joy in such a way that was community based and through the body. Dance is something I've used prior in my work, particularly ballroom, Vogue ballroom, and having a moment to sort of reflect back on that moment in time when I was working on Liturgia and thinking about trans rape culture and what that space means for people. I think often club spaces are seen as places to relieve oneself or to relax, to blow off steam. But for the trans community, I feel like it's very much so a place for us to be seen, whereas other people go there to escape or hide. For us, it's a place of really stepping into ourselves, into our comfort zones, at least personally for me, I feel much more comfortable in the night than in the day. There's something less, I guess there's just something less abrasive about the evening. I don't know. But also, I mean, historically, trans women have existed and claimed the space of nightlife for years and years. And so, you know, bringing that and putting it back into this space of, you know, private collection, you know, I'm dancing amongst some Monets, which is pretty wild. Like, I don't think I'd ever thought that I would be doing something like that in front of a, you know, master painter. But this space that, you know, the space of the private collection or the museum is often seen as an accessible space. It's a space that's built on a particular type of audience. It caters to a particular type of interest, white, middle class, upper class. There's a fantasy about the accessibility of that. What is it to be an art collector? What is it to be a gallerist? To be someone who owns, you know, art, who can afford it. And me coming from a space where I couldn't afford anything, and you know, really growing up on you know, what we had, and aspiring to be a part of a world that was so elitist, it didn't exactly welcome me with open arms. So thinking about this, you know, sort of destabilization of my body in this space and how the context affects myself, I was interested in trying to transform it and think about the potential of that space. You know, a museum is a great space for a party. And I think that, you know, trying to summon that and put it into the work, is initially my first, how I began to initialize that process of making.
Well, I mean, I love hearing you talk about this stuff. And I think what was so interesting for me helping to facilitate for you was talking about how you weren't just thinking of the space as kind of this open venue or this kind of random venue. You were really trying to engage with the kind of silhouettes of the collection, of some of the sculpture, and I'll show another image of our sculpture terrace, you know, actually kind of evoking some of the works themselves in a way that I thought was allowing the building and the collection to have a bit of life, to kind of inject it with a livelihood, which I just found so remarkable, especially when we were in a point of being closed to the public. But I think that so I'd love to hear you talk more about how I know this is part of a larger project, and I'm so glad that we can kind of add to the story of something that's much larger. I'd love to hear you talk about how this is contributing to the larger piece.
Sure. So during my time at Halcyon, I actually started working on a film, feature length is was sort of my goal, and thinking about how films work in gallery spaces and as well as in film festivals, and you know, what changes or you know, transformations of cinema do I need to instill in the work to be able to, you know, cater better to a shorter attention span, or you know, the space of a gallery. So this work is the prologue, which is, you know, its title, to a series of vignettes which together form a feature-length film, which follows the story of a trans woman and her partner who is making a journey through the woods, and she is, you know, her disembodied voice is narrating these moments of his journey, and it flashes back to a space in a hotel room, which you don't see in this. And it's kind of interesting because I've never really talked about a work that is a projection of something. You know, it's like there's more coming, but we're not seeing it. So there's like a lot of, I kind of really love the availability of what the imagination might create off of just this snippet of information that's provided within this film. But you know, it's told, the monologue that happens, the prose in this is a reflection. It starts like an epic poem in the middle of things, amidst a story that's already begun. And its language is reflecting back on a meeting of two lovers in a dance space. And the film itself is sort of a fantasy, a dream, a space that's, you know, not quite sure if it's in the real, or if it's, you know, located in some far off mystical dream or, you know, fantastic realm. And so her body, her disembodied voice continues to tell this story. And I don't want to give away the ending or any information, to be completely honest. So
Yeah.
yeah.
But I mean, this is something that I think that it's so interesting to think about these two parts, that you're engaging with the space in a way that can still own the issues that you're talking about in terms of who the museum is for, who museums historically have been for, and how to really push the envelope on our expectations is one piece. And then the fact that this is actually a story being told, and that this is going to be a piece of a larger film that tells a kind of you know, a story with many levels. So I love talking about all the texture of this work. And I know we had talked about, since we're not showing the video, of you possibly reading some of the text. So there is spoken word overlaid initially on the video, and then it kind of kicks into the more dance oriented performance with music. And so the spoken word, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how spoken word plays a part in your practice in general, and then if you would mind sharing some of what you'd say in this film.
Sure. So writing is always the first part of my practice. It's literally the biggest part, I think. And you know, I'm married to my notes app. I do a lot of writing, and I'm writing now even for the performance at Transformer. And you know, it always starts with these intense writings. And I think about you know, my lived experience, and I think my work is generally created through a regurgitating of lived experience and a fictioning of my autobiography, or, you know, a reflection of people that I've met or women that I've known, and bits and pieces of my community in that experience, and trying to, you know, keep this, I guess it's a weaving of, you know, you don't know whether or not everything is factual, or, you know, who are these characters? Are they stand-ins for real people? And I think through working that way, I've been able to really get to the core of, you know, the issues that I feel like my community and myself really come against, and brush up against. But yeah, I am totally happy to read some of it. I had to put on my like reading voice.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real poetry to how you perform it for the video. Yeah, I'll let you.
Sure. 1 second, let me just, okay. I let the bass line push me. It was soft and bright. Then, just like that, it faded away. As we danced to it, we at once felt the pleasure of being moved on all sides, engulfed, swallowed up in the substances of rhythm and music. A deep swell, faint and booming, girls and fairies dancing, clamoring, eyes shifting upon a sea of dark shrouded bodies like buoys in the ocean. Fog emerging from the seams of the room, forming clouds high above us, rolling, laser green, illuminated faces full with the click of the synth turned up, transfixed by this acid miasma. Us shapeshifters, at home in the rise of darkness, leaning on each other in gentle sways. Half one with me, you yell over the cacophony of drum and bass. Snap, pass, pop. And there we go. The air is so thick here, it too is a body, suspending us in sweet, acrid blackness. A ringing begins in my ears, shallow at first, creeping along a steady tune, then full. The quick flash of the strobe slowed as if lightning bottled. We hung in the air, folded into night. The deluge resumed, comforting in its dramatic overture. Our feet meeting the ground once again. Then, too, sunken into each other, meeting in a kiss, together, statuesque and blissful. Eyes closed, the molly hits, entangled in the thrash of bodies. We'd come here to get away and to ram into the things we wanted to escape. Everything hurt. Everything hurt. We'd come here to see us reflected back in the beautifully wild, decadent flood of din. Coming here was a fainting, a promise of fading away, of dissolving into, through, and beyond for us.
It's such a treat to have you read that live. It actually makes me glad that the video was, that, you know, we didn't want to ruin the video by having the connection be bad, because actually hearing you read it live is so wonderful. Thank you for that. So you were talking about your artistic practice and how written word is really part of how you build your pieces and the stories. And I'd love to talk about the physical nature of how you kind of decide how you come about enacting the performance, and how you prepare for that kind of endurance, because I was just really struck by the physical, and I mean, really this physical endurance of how you put this together.
Yeah, it's so funny. Dancing is so second nature to me. We grew up in a big Mexican family, and dancing is just, you know, my brother did it forever, and we'd always dance, and there were always parties and family gatherings and quinceañeras and all kinds of things. So, you know, dance was always something. And then in my undergrad, there used to be a place in Baltimore called the Paradox, which housed a LGBTQ ballroom Vogue community. And I used to go from time to time and would Vogue. And there was also this fabulous party, 4 Hours of Funk, that we she'd go out and basically 4 hours of funk music and people just dancing. And then at the very end of the night, they would have all of these like different kinds and types of dance, just people showing up and like leaving it all on the dance floor. And it was so that like rush of just seeing people really engage in their craft in such a way that was so much fun, and, you know, creating a space of people just celebrating, you know, dance. And so through that experience, I began to learn how to Vogue and to be a part of that community. And it grew as I was overseas into, you know, different other communities, and, you know, spending time working on perfecting, you know, some ballroom moves. I'm not the best. There are much better people than I. But it feels like a natural space for me to explore using my body, because, you know, the ballroom scene was born on the backs of Black and Latinx trans women. They put, you know, the ballroom scene on the map. They created it out of a space of, you know, desiring, having large fantasies of you know, wanting to be seen or to be people that they originally wouldn't have been able to be based on, you know, where they came from or how people treated them. You know, we refer to this as realness. Realness is just, you know, the ability to pass as something. You might not be the thing, but if you were given the opportunity, perhaps you could be. And I think that a large part of my practice, or actually no, a large part of my practice is, you know, making that fantasy a reality, and you know, really trying to allow people who see the work or who engage with the work to understand that all the performativity that we do from day to day, you know, is a performance. And we can, if we decide that we want to be the goddesses that we see on television or in, you know, media, like, we can do that. We just need to embrace it. You know, it's one thing to dream and wish that we could be something, but a whole entire other thing to allow that wall to dissipate and become it, and step into it. And I think trans women and queer people are so familiar with this because we learn everything through failure. And so we're always dreamers. So from very young ages, we hope to be the things that perhaps we told that we could never be because we don't have the access to it. And I think the art world is also that, you know, it's a lot of posturing, a lot of networking and performing. And in my practice, I try to break all of that apart and allow myself to be whoever the fuck I want to be. Excuse my French, but yeah.
Well, I love the way that you reference safe spaces and the kind of history of, I mean, for anyone who does not know the history of ballroom culture and voguing, it's worth going down a rabbit hole to learn more about it, because I think I mean it's such an incredible history, and I love this connection of, kind of almost isolating the movement outside of the cacophony of what would have been a very kind of energetic room, so that you're able to really focus on the figure in the story. There's something about that separation that I feel like it gives it more, um, it gives it kind of a poetic quality, which I really love.
Mm.
So I don't want to lose time to talk about how this feeds into your larger body of work, but this feels like a good transition actually to talk about how, not only the subject matter relates to other work that you've done, but that this relationship of photography and film and video and performance, I think is an interesting one. I don't know if you want to talk about how you kind of see yourself in between these different mediums.
Yeah, so like, my background is in photography, and later on I did a master's in fine art at Goldsmiths in London. Um, but lens-based media and reflecting on the self is always something I've done. Self-actualizing in the eye of a camera is I think a great importance to the trans community, to be able to check in and recognize that we exist, and we are evolving, and we're in charge of the way that we create ourselves. I started my transition in 2018, very softly, and honestly, I don't think I was even aware of the process of it, until I started to decide to photograph it, and to create the series of videos that I made alongside this photographic work that we're looking at, which is entitled Pearl as a series. And here, the portrait there on the left, Yabasa hijo se puta, which means enough motherfuckers, is this play on an art historical girl with a pearl earring painting, and there's this bloodshot eye, and this moment of assuredness and self-consciousness. The gaze is so important in this work. It's reflecting the gaze of the viewer. But the work was creation of self-portraits that I made during the process of going through this soft transition, and being styled. Half of the images are styled by men whom I had come into contact with on dating apps, or in just day to day at the bar. I would get in contact with these people, and they would tell me how I should feminize based on previous experience of being on a date, and someone say, oh, if you did this with your makeup, maybe, or if you wore something like this, it could be very sexy, and I just found this really interesting, the like brash boldness of men and their desires and their lust to be so performatively like unashamed. And so I took that and invited them to my studio and had them dress me. And then some of these are, self-styled. So there's this mix again of, is this Imogen's desire? Is this the desire of men? Which one are we looking at? And there's also these moments of, just me as myself, which kind of, puts you in this space of, again, guessing, who am I today? What is the performer? What version do you need to be for who you're going to see? But yeah, it seems like a lifetime ago now.
Well, and I mean, I imagine, I mean, we've talked about kind of not only capturing the space in which the trans body can move through, but also in conflating this separation between biography and an experience, a very personal experience, with a more fantasy oriented or a more kind of exterior projection of what it's supposed to be from other people's perspective, right? So So I imagine it, that conflation can also be really hard when you are actually living through it while you're documenting those changes.
Incredibly hard, as a trans woman every day, especially a Latinx trans woman, eyes are cast upon me all the time, and I have to engage with that. I've had such a difficult time being in America for precisely this reason, which I won't get into, but it is difficult to maintain this sort of awareness of the self and to constantly reflect on the self. It's difficult. Like, I'm sick of seeing these pictures, like uh, because it's also it is me, but it isn't me. And
Right. Yeah.
even the ones that I made myself don't feel like me anymore. They don't reflect me. But even if I wasn't dressed in a particular way, or if it was just a black and white simple photograph of myself, I still would feel that way. And I think if you put anyone else in that space of photographing themselves, they would recognize too that they are capable and do have all of these sides. And I think for me in my work, that's so important because it's about building a bridge between my community and the communities that seek to harm us.
Mhm.
Trying to normalize the conversation around, you're performing as well.
Mhm.
And then gender altogether is such a mess. Like,
Yeah, well, and expectations of identity,
mm,
that there should be kind of a kind of standard that anyone should follow, or some kind of expectation, which makes absolutely no sense.
mm,
Well, so I do want to get to this piece because I think this was the first piece that I saw of yours, and which struck me for many reasons, mostly because I felt protective of you watching this
mm.
piece, because you really, do you want to talk a little bit about what's happening and kind of how you approach this work?
Sure. So Kamehameha was made at the same time as those photographs, and it was actually the second film. There were two, and this was the second one that I made. Um, and so what you're looking at here is it's a busy high street in South London called Deptford High Street. My studio is located a block away from this street. So every day I would walk up and down this road, to just live my life, to get to my studio, to go to the Tesco to get snacks, like to eat out. This is where my life was lived. And in that experience of, the 2 or 3 years I was there, I received so much harassment on this very street, and decided, you know, how do I make a work about trans joy, but also with the very real implications of the gaze of the other? And so I decided to turn that high street into a runway, and I vogued from one side to the other and documented that performance. And so there I am in my shimmery jumpsuit. And all of those people are watching. They have no idea what's going on. But actually, the process of that, people were throwing things at me, calling me it. But it was honestly, it was such a freeing and honestly a really fun experience. Um, it also seems like a lifetime ago now too. But yeah, utilizing the same dance that was, created out of a space of community and care, as like honestly a salvo against, you know, normie culture.
And it's so cinematic too. I mean, this is where what interests me so much about your work is that the visuals are that there is this attention to craft image in a way as it to feel film, more like a cinematic film. And so, it's kind of dramatizing a very everyday encounter, but with a costume to kind of, um, give it a more of a kind of like a specialness, or something that like it's as if you're seeing like a unicorn. I mean, like something that's like remarkable and beautiful wandering through, and then with all of the hate surrounding it, I think I really felt protective of you watching this, because You can see, and that's the other interesting part of it. You can see the gaze of the people around you really clearly in the film,
Mm,
and it's it's a bit haunting, I would
mm,
say.
mm. Yeah, I think, aesthetics are so important to me as well, just from having so much training in lens-based media, it's natural. I think having a photographic background to build composition in such a way seems really one-to-one. But it's also, unfortunately, I think the way that we enter into the public sphere, art is appreciated for its beauty outside of academia. And I think that that's a great way to deliver really life-altering messages, or cinema works in this way. It takes the stage at face value, and it allows to transport the audience into a space that they wholeheartedly believe exists. The story is there within the silver screen, and we're just sitting in a black box watching it. So the grandiosity of costuming and performing, and the way that it's shot and filmed is all very important, because it is a fantasy, isn't it? But it's based in reality, and I think that dissipating again that barrier is something that I'm genuinely very interested in, because it allows people to understand that you know they could do it just as easily. I mean, you don't need the camera to do it, you know what I mean? um, but yeah, it's definitely something that I utilize in my work.
See what else we have here. Well, speaking of cinematic gorgeousness, do you want to talk a little bit about this piece as well?
Sure. So these are actually some behind the scenes shots, just for my notes. They're like from an archive. They don't actually exist on the internet anymore. So, but
Lucky us.
but these are just some behind the scene photographs from a series, or a film called La Morena, which is again part of Pearl. It was the first film that I made, and it's shot on 16 millimeter, and it sort of plays into this sort of old Hollywood feeling of that attention to color, and the grandiosity of the space that it exists in. So similar to the Kreeger, this piece was performed in Mayfair in London at a private gentleman's club. And private clubs in London, you pay like ridiculous fees every year to be a part of. Basically, it's a boys' club of rich people who go and have their drinks and have little soirees. Um, this one particularly is very much a boys' club. I think until 2011 they hadn't opened their doors to women, so very particular. But I was invited to this club. I was given a grant by them actually, in London when I was studying at Goldsmiths, and I was working on another body of work, a series of photographs in the Faroe Islands around seafaring and masculinity and how it shapes sailors. And that work was happening pre-transition. And actually, when I was invited to give this talk, it was about 3 or 4 months into me soft transitioning. And so I was requested to wear a suit jacket and to show up in a particular way and style and form. And so I showed up in a dress with some makeup on, and it was fabulous. I had a great time, but I might as well have been naked, because
Wow.
everybody was just staring at me like I was insane. It's also probably the first time I engaged with someone in the trans community outside of the art world. I met some trans women there working as escorts, and it was so interesting to see the reflection of us there, and me being acutely aware of that space. And as I was there, I was propositioned for sex in return for money, um, which turned into a whole fiasco. And the club was incredibly apologetic. And so I asked them, oh, I'd love to come and photograph the architecture. It'd be fabulous to make some large format photography of the space for you guys. And they were like, oh yeah, that sounds fab. So they gave me a date on a calendar. I showed up with a film crew and I made the film.
Wow, that's amazing.
And
For you.
the film, it details the story about Jess, this escort, trans escort I met, who's incredible. And she actually put me in makeup, and she gave me all these tips, and it was a fabulous time. And she was a fabulous person. And she would tell me about all her clients and her lifestyle, and just her like wealth strewn sugar daddy lifestyle and how fabulous it was. And watching her, you know, talk about it was just so magical because you really felt like you were transported into this other world. And so it tells the story of Jess and how she eventually detransitioned because of her struggle with addiction. And also it tells the story of how, you know, this came to be, this proposition for sex and this fetishization of Latinx women. And so in the film, I do this performance, which is a folklorico piece called La Morena, which means brunette or the bronze skinned woman. And it talks about, you know, how beautiful Latin women are, and it's you know, a restaging in this blazer, I would say club appropriate attire, as opposed to a folklorico gown, where I'm performing that folklorico dance in the space of this grand architecture. So again, it's this thing of trying to summon the culture of, you know, where I come from, and Latinx women and our histories and the bodies of Latinx women, and reclaim that space for us, particularly literally white colonizer space, built on the money of, you know, probably slave trade owners, like if you go far back enough in history. And really, you know, me being this person who comes from a small town in Texas with no money, and being in this suddenly very obtuse, grand, gold encrusted architectural space, invited to talk about what I do without any second thought as to who I am, or, you know, respect for, you know, where I come from. And so it was a really, for me, it was a great experience, like to make that work. I think it really began that triggering of wanting to inflict things upon a space, and to take possession of how spaces inflicted themselves upon me, which is something trans women do every day when we go to the grocery store or go to see family. We have to arm ourselves for, you know, those moments.
That's so interesting in thinking about how to depict space in art form with that kind of concept in mind. I mean, I know we've talked about the intense and sometimes suffocating nature of desire on trans bodies, and how there's this, that it's really complicated. It's a really complicated reality.
Mm.
And I mean, I love how this, I mean, I feel like this touches on every work that you've done in different ways, but this to me feels like more of an empowerment. Do you think that's fair? More of an empowerment version of kind of touching on how desire can be this troubling piece.
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, like, I create myself out of my own desire, and I think desire is a potent thing. You know, I can be sexy for myself. I don't need to be sexy for anyone else, you know. Um, and so many women relate to that. Outside of trans women, but unfortunately for us, you know, we're so fetishized. Our access to love and care is through often falling into these situations of, you know, being with chasers. Chasers are men who fetishize trans women, who identify straight and have a lot of shit they need to work out. But you know, trying to engage with that community as well. And I think, you know, in my new film as well, I'm trying to engage with that community and actually call it a part of the trans community, which is controversial and difficult, because it's that community, it's that part of the community that is ultimately harming us, is killing us. And if we can't shift the way that these men are looking at us and fetishizing us, and thinking about their shame, and dealing with their, you know, issues around masculinity, then I don't think we'll be able to change the problem. You know, trans panic doesn't come from people who are just out to get trans women. It comes out of desire. It's born out of an inability to escape one's needs, and to be damned for it or demonized. And all of this demonizing is something we're so familiar with as queer people, because again, as I said, we learned to love and to be through failure. And unfortunately, for many cultures and many straight male cis spaces, men, cultures, it's difficult to, you know, allow oneself to even imagine a space outside of being the man or living in a particular way, you know, being in a lifestyle that is preset for you by the rest of society.
Mm. Boy, we could talk on that topic for a very long time. So I just got my 15-minute warning, and I want to leave time for questions. So I think, let's see, should we pick one more? Which would you prefer? We have two options.
Let's do the second option.
Okay, great.
Because it's all the same work. So this is just some stills from Liturgia, which I spoke a little bit about before. Liturgia was this film work that I created at A4 Sounds in Dublin. And particularly, I was working with Aisling, who's back there, this amazing harpist who I'm actually collaborating with for the piece in June. So come and hear some of Aisling Ennis's amazing work. But the piece was created out of this desire to really talk about and engage with the femicide of trans women globally, and to elongate that conversation outside of a space of martyring these women on social media and then forgetting them weeks later. You know, it seems every time that this happens, a trans woman is murdered, it's put on social media, we forget about it. Nobody really does anything about it. The media doesn't pick it up in the ways that it should. And, you know, there's no real conversations happening around how we're changing it. And so for me, it was just like, you know, I've seen so many of my sisters die. People I know. When I moved here, one of my friends that I used to work with in London moved to New York, and she unfortunately passed away. And it was all because of trans panic and these situations. And it's so real, the violence that we experience. And I think the people in my life here in America have seen it firsthand as well. And it's so unbelievable that it's just not something where people see, you know, how many people know a trans woman? How many people, like, you know, can tell me about their trans friends or what their dreams are, you know, what they do for a living? Very few people. Most people get that information through media, through film, you know. I think it's probably like 80% of Americans don't know a trans woman. And so it's a very dissociated, that's a problem there kind of thing. And after doing so much research into all these heinous murders, and honestly, you would think that we were living in the 50s in the time of serial killers, reading some of this stuff, it's just so disgusting. I created this performance work and, you know, was hoping to stoke the fires of the community to begin conversations around, you know, what do we do? How do we make the moves to protect us? And it was a wonderful experience because in Dublin, I had access to TENI, which is the Transgender Equality Network Ireland. Lilith Carroll there was amazing. And Gender RIP, which is an organization of trans artists. And through them, I really got to be placed in directly in this vein of trans community. And I experienced such a different version of being in community with trans women and seeing firsthand, you know, them coming together and doing something. And so having them on board with this project was amazing. And since then, I've had so many opportunities now talking about this, and I feel like it did do what it set out to do. I've begun to have those conversations with so many people in so many spaces. So it's great to know that it's not just my community that sees this work, it's, you know, the general public.
I love that. So I don't want to cut you off because I want to hear more about, you know, we could keep going forever. Is there anything else that we should talk about with this work before we take questions? I want to make sure we have a couple of questions waiting for us.
Sure. You know, vocal performance is something I use in my work. I'm a karaoke queen. Anyone who knows me knows this. And I wouldn't call myself a singer, but I think the fantasy of what a singer can be, especially growing up and like growing up in the time of like Britney Spears and Selena Quintanilla and, you know, all of the big pop divas and the ballads and the fantasy of what that is, this sort of women, these powerful women with these amazing voices, and reflecting back on these moments of being able to control how the world sees you in such a way, you know, especially for me with Selena Quintanilla. It was like, okay, well, here's this amazing bright star who got snuffed out too young, but came from where I grew up, and if she can do it, so can I. And you know, I'm not a singer, but I found my own way. um, I'm a singer in my shower. Um, but yeah, to you know, work in these new ways, and to allow myself to be vulnerable in that way. You know, my work is so vulnerable already, but to also be allowed to have fun with the performance of those things has been really, I think, freeing. And I think for a lot of trans women, performing is I think you'll find there's a through line. Our performances are so enthralling. Yeah.
Well, this gets to the shape shifting that you've talked about, right?
Yeah, becoming the chanteur, or you know, the dancer, the pop star, becoming a music video or film, a cinema,
Mm.
silver screen beauty. You know, it's all wrapped up in this little package of my art practice. But also, I take a lot of that out of my practice and live it in my day to day,
Mm.
because I don't want to live a boring life, and I'm not afraid to be the woman I am. So, I'm just hoping that, you know, I think another thing that I actually have been thinking about a lot more recently too is the importance of trans icons. And actually, I think something we didn't discuss about the piece is that the tracks are built off of a producer, Sophie Zayon, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year. She was a trans producer, and she produced for all the greats, Madonna, Rihanna. She had her own music, which was fantastic. And she was one of my few trans heroes. There were only two that I had. And she passed, and when she passed, the community really mourned for her and still mourns for her, because when we were growing up, we didn't have versions of ourselves. We had Buffalo Bill and all of the disgusting transphobic representations of trans women in popular cinema. And something I think about quite often is how important it is to have heroes that reflect the self. And, you know, allowing myself to become that hero for myself is, I think, a huge thing.
Mm. For like a younger version, like if there's a younger you able to see your work.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that I would be someone's hero, but for myself, I think.
But it's so important to see. I mean, as you said, not only for the fictional version, but to have to be. I mean, normalizing is not the right word, but just to have more access to different bodies, right?
Yeah,
And knowing the differences of how those bodies exist in the world.
yeah,
Okay, so we have like 10 more minutes, a little less. So let's take a couple questions.
sure.
Okay, the first question is, did the lightness of the space, I'm assuming this is talking about the Kreeger piece, did the lightness of the space factor into your thinking for this performance since it's not nighttime?
Yeah, absolutely. So technically, in order to film at night, you need a lot of lighting equipment, which is not a problem when you have a lot of money. Um, but also the way that that space fills with light is, it's almost chiaroscuro. It reflects a painting, and it's fabulous. I mean, we were really lucky to get an overcast day, which is perfect because it means the shadows are, you know, non-existent. So it gives me most control in it in the editing suite. Um, to really play with the way that light and color look. And I shoot on vintage lens, so it's all a film camera lens that you're seeing. And that particular, I mean, it's a particular aesthetic that I probably romanticize too much, but for me, it feels more lived in than the glossiness of, you know, well, I mean, it works in some of the work, like Kamehameha is shot on a new digital camera. But this was shot, you know, very particularly through this lens that feels lived in. Nighttime would be great, but I think it would have I would have needed to transform the space a lot more for that. And perhaps it's a thing, I don't know. But I was also really interested in the coldness of the environment outside, uh,
Mhm.
which is something that I think you'd lose in that, and the way that light plays a role in that film.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm.
Okay, so the second question is, how do you feel that shape-shifting transgresses from identity, self-knowing, and making work for a viewer? There's a lot in that question.
Yeah, there is a lot. Hi, Hunter. um, yeah, so gosh, it is a very complicated, it's a very complicated experience, shapeshifting. But you know, I think I mean, Hunter especially knows this because Hunter's known me so long, but shapeshifting is something that we do to survive. I think everybody does it, you know, from the moment that you wake up in the morning and decide what you're going to do, who you're going to meet, how you're going to dress. You know, that was something that used to plague me as a child because I was always so self-conscious. I had to fit into these binaries of what it was to be a queer man and how
Mm.
to, how to sell myself as a professional, and you know, really having to come to terms with all of that was really difficult. And um, you know, shapeshifting and identity are both amorphous, and my gender feels very amorphous. You know, I'm a non-binary trans woman, and um, cycling that through the sort of, I guess what you're referring to is a self-knowing of, you know, the actualizing of my identity, um, and then putting it on display for others. It's something that I think takes a lot of care, a lot of self-care. And it's something that I've become really good at because unfortunately for me, I don't know how to make work outside of just, you know, using what I know, because what I know is something I always feel comfortable engaging with. But it's also born out of this anger and this space of wanting to change and shift, and so I think that my main thing of the performance for other people is a bit tongue in cheek. It's like there are things that the world doesn't see, of course, but the performance of the self is not. It's not, of course, always a performance. Like, you know, we're performing now, artist and curator, but um, in our day to day, the performance of self isn't, you know, oh, today I'm going to be this way. There's a truth that exists within that, and I think I try to bring that truth back into the work. Um, and I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope it taps on all the things that you're thinking.
So I have 3 more minutes, and if there are no other questions, I actually would like to ask you a question. And I think so. I'm curious, and you might not. There might not be an answer for this question, but I'm curious after doing the piece at the Kreeger and now having some time to think about it in relation to this larger work. Has that experience changed the way that you are approaching spaces in the future? Has it kind of impacted your thinking about your practice at all, or maybe not? I'm just curious.
Through making this work,
What'd you say?
through making this work at the Krieger.
Yeah, I mean, or just kind of the quirkiness of being in the space, being around the Monets. I'm curious how that factors in and how you're engaging spaces going forward.
You know, it's not always as planned as it might seem, and I think even with the Krieger, there was a quite a bit of you know, flexibility there.
Mhm.
Um, I try not to prescribe any precognitions into the work, because for me, you never know what's gonna ignite something.
Mhm.
And also, if I knew what it was gonna be, why would I make it? You know, it's not.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
It's just like if you see the end product so like neatly packaged, it doesn't seem like it's challenging or it's engaging. And I think really for me, work always needs to be both of those things. It also needs to be accessible. So um, that space is so particular as well. And it was a difficult one actually too to think about, because there are so many spaces within it, that you really have to, and there's so much information. I mean, when I saw the sculptures, it was a fabulous moment of like, these are bodies, they're moving, they're dancing,
Yeah.
right? It's such a rave. Like I have to get into this. Like,
Yeah.
um,
That's awesome.
yeah, but you know, I try to let the space influence me when I'm there, and if it has a history, particularly, I'm like in the future works, the woods I'm working in have a deep history with me. So I think that also comes out in that work. But you know, I always try to leave a little pocket of flexibility to allow, you know, unexpected things to happen, and I think that's where the magic is.
Mhm. Well, boy, that's a good place to wrap up. Well, thank you so much. This has just been a total pleasure for me. And please, if you haven't seen the film, find it on our YouTube channel. There is a link in the chat. And I just have to, oh, we didn't get to, well, we almost got to everything. Please visit our website to find more about visiting us, but also our upcoming virtual programming. And please join us for the next artist talk, Jessica Valores, July 14th. I'll be happy to see you all again there. And thank you so much, Imogen-Blue.
Yeah, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. And yes, please go check out Jessica's work. She's amazing.
Stay tuned for more on that.
Thank you all for coming. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces.